Alright, so I'm back with another Road to 2200 game. Uh, got a 2151 rating in this one, and my opponent was 2172. And if you remember, I think it was game number 12, I played this dude, Noisy Cork, with the black pieces against a weird anti-Sicilian, so I figured he probably would also do that again in this game. So after e4, c5, knight f3, I chose to counter him with knight to f6. So I figured if I do d6 or any other normal move, he's probably going to play something weird or an offbeat with his bishop. So he's probably going to go like bishop b5 or bishop c4, something strange or atypical. So I went knight f6 because I wanted to see how he would treat that position, and I kind of wanted to take the reins of the position. So the best way to play is probably to play e5, and after knight d5, play knight to c3. But in the game, we had pawn to d3, just defending this pawn on e4. This is kind of a conservative approach, and I was happy to see this. I go pawn to d6, looking to bring this bishop out potentially, also stop him from playing pawn to e5. He goes knight c3, and I look to fianchetto my bishop on the long diagonal. He goes bishop g5, I go bishop g7, and he goes queen d2. I go pawn h6, bishop f4, and g5, and after bishop g3, I just look to get the bishop pair immediately. He goes bishop e2, I take the bishop, and play knight to c6, controlling these squares very well. He goes pawn to a3. It's kind of a mysterious move. He's kind of waiting to castle kingside or queenside, I think, but a3 is kind of a strange move. He might look to play b4 at the right time, but I think this is more of just a waiting move to see if I castle kingside or to see what I do in this position. I go pawn to e6 and he castles. So in this position, I actually thought he was going to go queenside, but then when he went a3, I was a little bit unsure, because once he plays a3, I don't think he's going to castle queenside because it makes him more prone to an attack over here when he moves these pawns. But I played pawn to a6, just looking to play pawn to b5 if he allows it. He plays rook a b1 because he wants to play pawn to b4 and strike on the wing. And I play queen to f6. So the point of this is if he plays b4, I take his knight. But instead, he plays bishop to d1, which is another unusual move. But I think he just wants to move this knight to e2. I'm not sure why he wants to move the knight to e2 versus d1, but so be it. Also, bishop d1 kind of sidesteps the bishop out of the way of a knight d4 jump. It also lends some support to c2 if that's really needed, but I don't think bishop d1 is the best move. I go pawn b5, he goes knight e2, and I go pawn to e5. So I really wanted to stop him from going pawn to d4 here by putting an extra grip on it with these two pawns, but I think this might be kind of a inferior move because I'm blocking this bishop in, and I think the best way for him to play is to play knight back to c3 and then go knight d5, but I figured he might not see that when I play it, and he's just played knight e2. So he plays c3 and instead looks to play d4. I go g4, knight h4, and h5. So I want to play bishop to h6 and improve the position of my bishop. And he goes pawn to f4. So I thought he was going to play this move. The engine calls it a mistake. I think it's actually a good move. It's about the same as the other options. The other options being like bishop to b3 and pawn to b4. I think both of those would have been reasonable, but I think f4 is a pretty logical move. So this rook is opposite my queen, and I think he wants to open things up as a result. I should probably take en passant, and then after rook takes f3, look to just move the queen to h6, but instead, I chose to play bishop to h6 and pin this pawn to his queen. He goes queen e1, and I go bishop to e6. So I don't think it would be a great idea for him to play f5 here, because then I drop the bishop back, and then I can look to move this bishop somewhere along this diagonal, and this bishop is a pretty good piece here, and this knight is kind of forever out of the game if he puts this pawn on f5. So f5 is a square that this knight would like to jump to at some point, if it can. And if he plays f5, he can't do that. So instead, he plays queen to f2, still looking to potentially play pawn to d4 at some point or to take on e5. I take on f4. He goes knight takes f4, and I go bishop g5. So here, I really want to take on h4 at some point, but really my bishop is just a pretty good piece here. And if he ever moves this knight, so if he goes knight d5 or knight takes e6 or something like that, I'm going to trade the queens, and I think I like that resulting position because this bishop isn't very good, this knight isn't very good, and I have a pretty good position. So, and that's what we have in the game. He plays knight takes e6, and then I trade the queens, and then go f takes e6. And the problem is here, I am threatening bishop to e3, which would be good. He can try knight to g6 to get his knight back into the game, but after rook g8, knight f4, I wasn't so sold on this. I think I'd just go king e7, and I still like my position here. I feel like this knight is temporary here, and I can look to just bring my pieces into the game, maybe play h4 at the right time. Knight e5 is looming, but he didn't go knight g6, which I thought he might. Instead, he goes rook f1 to stop me from going bishop to e3. I take his knight, which is probably not the best way of playing. I should probably just go knight e5 right away, but for some reason I really wanted to get the knight off the board, even though it wasn't doing anything, and then play this knight versus bishop endgame, because I felt like the knight is better in this position. Knight to e5 is coming, and I think I have a pretty decent position. He goes bishop c2, I go rook f8, g3, knight to e5. He goes king g2, which I think is a slightly inferior move to something like rook takes f8 maybe, or just something like rook f2 maybe, and look to double. But I think I'm going to be the one that's getting control of this f-file regardless, so I think I like my position anyway. But he goes king g2, which allows rook to f3. He tries to go d4, I take, and then I go rook to c8. So if he takes here, rook takes c2 is going to be very, very good for me. You don't want to allow this. So after rook to c8, he plays bishop to d1, hitting my rook on f3. I have to trade. If I move my rook somewhere else, then he takes my knight. So rook takes f1, king takes f1, and I give another check. He goes to g2 again, which he probably shouldn't do because now the king is cut off. And I go knight to f3. I think better would have been either knight to d3 or knight to c4. Knight to d3 if he does nothing, let's say. I think rook to f2 is going to be very good for me. But in the game, it was knight to f3, and he trades. And I think I was pretty confident here that I had a winning rook endgame. Maybe it's not winning yet, but definitely much better for black because I have the better king, the better rook, and he's got weak pawns that I can target. So he goes rook c1 to try and create counterplay, but rook d3, and after check, I'm hitting this pawn, which he can't defend, and I'm also threatening rook d2 check to win this pawn. So I really like my position here. He plays e5 check, I take, and I take again. If he plays rook to c5 check, I just block with the rook, I believe. Let's take a look. Rook c5 check. I think my intention was to block with the rook, and he can't trade because that's going to be a losing king and pawn endgame. But instead, in the game, he plays rook to h7. I give a check, and then I just start to march my king in and take this pawn on b2. He takes. He goes for this e6 pawn, but I go for this h5 pawn. He takes. I take. He takes on a6, but this pawn is going to be too quick. This pawn's going to be too fast. There's nothing that he can do. If he ever brings his king over, I can just keep pushing this pawn. So in the game, he tries rook to a5 to try and play a4, but then this pawn is just too fast, and he resigned here. But I think alternatively, if he had tried to play something like rook to g6, I can always just keep pushing this pawn. And if he tries to bring his king into the game at some point, like this, I can always give a check. And then after king to e2, I can queen. This might not even be the most accurate way of playing, but it's good enough. So after uh, what happened in the game, he tried to play rook a5, but his rook was just too slow and this pawn was too fast, and he resigned. But this was a good bounce back game after losing a couple games on tilt to some strong players. And this is my second win against this guy, and I'm looking to build upon this win. So we're rocking with a 2151 rating, and hopefully we can keep it going. But this was a solid game, and I will see you guys in the next game.